And welcome to 303. We now turn in Senior English A to what really many are going to argue is the greatest writer, certainly that we will study in our senior experience. Many will argue that ever has played with words. It is, of course, going to be a fascinating study right from the start. Let's go ahead, however, and just point out a couple of things starting on page 272, 273. It's fascinating to me, before I even get into these pages, to point this out for your notes at level 1. It's fascinating to me that regularly, when you talk with other people about William Shakespeare, they immediately go to his plays. And they will say, oh yeah, that guy that wrote Romeo and Juliet, or that guy that's responsible for maybe the greatest play of all time, Hamlet, blah, blah, blah. They're often unaware that Shakespeare is actually better known in the years that follow his death, not for his plays, but for his poetry. He is going to, in many ways, be considered, certainly by the year 1800 and the English Romantic period, the greatest poet who ever lived. Not playwright, poet. That is to say, the sonnets that he writes are considered the high watermark. Spencer, Sidney, Sir Thomas Wyatt, others are going to write sonnets during the Elizabethan era. But by the time Keats is writing, for example, Keats will say that the greatest poet of all time is none other than Shakespeare. So we're going to take a look at 4 of these sonnets of his, and we're going to ask, is it true? Does it measure up? Let's take a look now at the connecting to the essential question. Shakespeare. Change the structure. Let's write this down right away at level 2b. The structure of the Petrarchian sonnet, as you read, identifies some of the differences between the Shakespearean and the Petrarchian sonnet. Noting these differences will help you answer the essential question, what is the relationship of the writer to tradition? Shakespeare is a game changer. Let's just say that now. If Petrarch is the inventor of the sonnet form, he's Italian. And the English during the Renaissance inherit that form and then start to play around with it, as we saw with our study of Spencer and Sidney. Shakespeare will invent his own form that we will call, for your notes, the Shakespearean Sonnet. I hope you're with me on page 272. And we're now working at 2b. That is to say, that rhetorical level of writing an annotative work. Okay? Not what the poet says, but how the poet says it. And we have an identifiable structure now that we're going to write in our notes at 2b. One of the reasons this is important is because here very soon you will be assigned to write a Shakespearean sonnet. That will be your assignment. Well, what will that look like? Well, I've already given some lectures to kind of outline that, but let's go ahead and review here. A Shakespearean sonnet, I'm with you reading on 272. A Shakespearean sonnet has 3 things. Let's write it down. 1, 14 lines. 2, iambic pentameter. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. 5. Ba-bum is an iambic. Foot. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. Right? Okay. Do you remember it? 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Listen to it again. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. The genius, of course, of Shakespeare is that the majority of Romeo and Juliet written in iambic pentameter. The opening prologue to Act 1 of R&J is in fact a 14-line sonnet. So you've got to have 14 lines, you've got to have iambic pentameter. Unlike, however, the Petrarchian and the Spenserian sonnets, a Shakespearean sonnet follows the rhyme scheme. You'll want to write this in your notes. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Of course, that is a certain structure of, notice, 3 quatrains. That is to say, 4-line stanzas. A, B, A, B. Right? C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F. And then finally, a rhyming couplet, G, G. That dramatically restates or redefines a theme. As you read, notice Shakespeare's quatrains, couplets. Also notice how his sentences often continue past lines and sometimes past quatrains. In other words, put it in your notes this way at 2b, and this will help you to be able to read not only Shakespeare's sonnets, but other poetry as well. We want to read the thought and not the line. I'll say it again and then I'll explain it. We want to read the thought and not the line. So in other words, when we get to the end of the line, we're not going to stop and take a pause. No, 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 no. We're going to pay attention to our punctuation. If we see a comma at the end of the line or a period at the end of the line, we'll stop for a split second, give ourselves an intellectual breather, and then we'll go on. But if we don't see any punctuation, we're going to keep reading to the next line because that continues the thought. Does that make sense? That'll make it a lot easier for you to be able to read this stuff. Through all Shakespeare's sonnets, I'll continue. Though all Shakespeare's sonnets have 14 rhyming lines, there are no rules about the number or types of sentences. Shakespeare uses this freedom of syntax. Let's write that word. It just simply means grammar. Structure, sentence structure. To create dazzling dramatic effects. By saying his main idea, he's going to save it often until the very final lines, right? In the end of one long sentence, lines 13, 14. He makes, for example, Sonnet 106, build like a lawyer's statement to a jury. Reading strategy. Let's keep going. A sonnet's rhyme scheme, stanza, syntax, or text structures. You can better understand a sonnet by analyzing its text structures, noticing how they contribute to the sonnet's clarity of meaning, aesthetic impact. For example, each quatrain helps develop the main problem or argument, which the couplet then dramatically restates or redefines. And then notice a chart here I do highly recommend for you at level 1. So for example, for each of these sonnets at level 1, I recommend that you play the game of this chart. What do the first 4 lines say? What's the basic idea there? And then of course the second 4 lines and so on and so on. All right. The other thing I would notice really quickly, please, is that you have the vocabulary work of the 6 lines here. Hey, can I say this? You know these 6 vocab words are going to end up on the examination. So make sure that you know these words, all right? All right, let's go over now to 273. Of course, when we look at Biography of Shakespeare, that's a big dog deal, so let's make some observations. Can we say this out loud really quickly? We don't know hardly anything about this guy Shakespeare. We know very, very little about his life, okay? Let's go ahead and take a look at a few things we do know. Look at the dates. 1564 to 1616, which is why I recommend that you write down right now, the easy working date for Shakespeare is 1600. That is an easy working date, okay? The year that we kind of think that maybe Shakespeare's Hamlet was first performed on the stage. It's a good round figure for us, 1600. Let's go ahead and read a few notes and take a few notes now about the biography of Shakespeare. Shakespeare may be the most admired author of all time. If he were living today, he would be a celebrity, and the facts of his life would be widely available in magazine articles, books, web pages. Instead, we know few facts about him, and these few had to be painstakingly traced from legal and church records or deduced from references in his work. Bare bones biography. Let's take a look. By bare bones here, we simply mean we don't know a lot about him. Shakespeare was born in the country town of Stratford-on-Avon, probably attended the town's grammar school. When he was 18, he married 26-year-old Anne Hathaway. They had a daughter, Susanna, and twins, Hamnet and Judith. Shakespeare acquired a public reputation as an actor and playwright. In addition, he was part owner of a London theater called The Globe, where many of his plays were performed. And for more about Shakespeare and his work as a dramatist, of course, we're going to look at pages 316, 319. So let's just write down a couple of observations. Some students are surprised to hear this. Shakespeare was first and foremost an actor, so let's write that down. He was an actor who also was a writer of plays and was also a poet. A poet, as we've already said, of remarkable reputation. The other thing we should point out is that Shakespeare lives in Stratford-on-Avon, leaves his family there, and then comes to London, where he lives most of his adult life in London without his family there. Okay, and then when he wishes to see his family, he will travel outside the city. All right? Now let's focus on this thing, the sonnet. In the years 1592 to 1594, let's write those years down. 1592 to 1594. London's theaters were closed because of an outbreak of the plague. This general misfortune may have had at least one benefit. It may have produced the time that Shakespeare needed to write some of his 154 sonnets. Write it down. Shakespeare will write a sequence of 154 sonnets. That again, as we say, will become considered the greatest examples of the sonnet ever written. When you ask 200 years later in 1800, John Keats, the greatest, arguably, of the romantic sonneteers, We'll meet John Keats later in Senior English B. He will always reference these 154 sonnets of Shakespeare as the single greatest construction in poetics of all time. Let's keep going. In writing a long sequence of sonnets, Shakespeare was being fashionable. Elizabethan poets enjoyed the sonnet form, writing 14-line lyric poems to both real and imaginary lovers. The great Italian poet Petrarch, there of course again are his dates, pioneered the writing of sonnet sequences. His sequence charts each pang and longing of the speaker's unfulfilled love for an idealized lady. This poetic device led to endless inventiveness. The beloved's beauty invites extravagant comparisons. She provides a focus for the poet's ingenuity. Shakespeare's sequence. Like the sonnet sequences of other poets, Shakespeare's 154 sonnets are numbered. Most of them are addressed to a handsome, talented young man, urging him to marry and have children who can carry on his talents. Readers treasure Shakespeare's masterful use of the sonnet to bring the fundamental experiences of life, time, death, love, friendship into tight focus. Notice from Sonnet 55, you even have this quote, not marble nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme. Let's take a look now at the first of our 4 sonnets that we will study together. I am with you on page 275. We are going to look at Sonnet 29. And as I said to you, as we were studying Spenser and Sidney sonnets, you have to learn these sonnets by their number as you prepare for our examination, because that's how they'll be referenced in the exam. So let's take a look. Sonnet 29. Let's pay attention to this one. I'm going to go ahead and read Sonnet 29, okay, and then I'm going to ask you, right, because we've already been working with Sidney, Spenser and Sidney sonnets. Let's see how well, after you read this sonnet with me, you can at least kind of figure out what's being said. Let's take a look, shall we? Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despairing, happily I think on thee. And then my state, like to the lark at break of dawn arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Now right away at 2B, let's make a couple of observations. Is it 14 lines? It is. Do we have rhyme scheme? Take a look at the end rhyme. Notice the last word of line 1, eyes, rhymes with the last word of line 3, cries. The last word of line 2, state, rhymes with the last word of line 4, faith. So what do we have there? Look at it with me now. A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. All right? So we definitely have rhyme scheme. Do we have iambic pentameter? Take a look at the line. I all alone beweep my outcast state. Line 2. Right? I all alone beweep my outcast state. But if we slow that down and scan it, read it with me. I all alone beweep my outcast state. Look at it again. I all alone beweep my outcast state. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. I all alone beweep my outcast state. Iambic pentameter. So we are looking at what we will call now a Shakespearean sonnet. Obviously a sonnet written by Shakespeare. So that's all the work we're going to do for now at 2B. Let's jump now to level 1, and let's just ask a simple question. We've got 4 lines here, right, that we will want to make sure that we understand as we get ready to work with this first quatrain. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Notice he begins. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. Disgrace, good or bad? Disgrace. Bad, right? When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state. Notice he says, when I am really happy or sad. Happy or sad. Really sad, right? He says, when I'm really sad about the fact that I'm all alone, I'm an outcast, we might say. Whoa, an outcast? This cat, Shakespeare, feels like an outcast. This is significant for us because when he's writing this sonnet, he himself, Shakespeare, is actually not the famous gun that he once was, right? Okay? And with that regards, notice he continues, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries. In other words, I call to God. My bootless cries means I'm not being heard. Deaf heaven means God isn't listening to me. In other words, I'm praying all the time and it's not working out. And look upon myself and curse my fate. In other words, he says, when I feel like a total loser. When he says, I feel like a total loser. Why? Wishing, he's going to tell us why he's so sad. Look at the next line, line 5. Wishing me like to one more rich in hope. Man, I wish I had more hope. Hope of my future. We're talking about the most famous writer of all time. When he was alive, are you ready for this? He did not know it. No idea. And he says, man, I wish I could have more hope. Look at the next line. Featured like him with friends possessed. Well, I've had a couple of singers that say, I know what this feels like. Dude, I wish I had more friends. I wish I had more people that I could actually trust. I wish I had more people that I feel like I could get along with. It's not happening for me. It's not happening for me. Look at the next one. Desiring this man's art and that man's scope. In other words, he says, when I look at other people and I say, I wish I was as good, as talented, as able as those people. Man, I wish I could have more talent as a writer. Shakespeare says this. With what I most enjoy, contented least. The thing I most enjoy writing, he says, is the thing I'm least contented with. Why? Because again, he kind of thinks of himself as a loser. Yet in these thoughts myself, almost despising, line 10, now the shift, happily I think on thee. Oh, he says, when I get really sad, because I'm a total loser, I have no hope, nobody's ever going to read a single thing I write, nobody's ever going to think that I'm any kind of a writer. When I get really sad, he says, happily I think on thee. And then my state like to the lark, the songbird, at break of day, arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. In other words, he says, when I get really, really sad, I find myself thinking about my girl, the one I love. And then all of a sudden, well, look at the last two lines. For thy sweet love remembered, such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. He says, I would rather have you than the $1,000,000 that a king would have. And the minute I remember that, and the minute that I think about my girl in that way, I get really, really happy. And then, he says, I'm ready to be okay with the life that is mine. All right, so there you go. Sonnet 29, an introduction to the sonnet. Thank you.